Today, I have two very distinguished panelists with me to talk about really fun stuff about EB-5 and how that can be a great solution for a lot of families. So one with his camera on right now, Jeff DeSico from Golden Gate Global, our firm, who is heading our business development efforts. And also we have Nima Korpivara from KLD Law Firm, a very, very well-known immigration attorney and an expert in EB-5 for all legal matters. So our conversation today will be as possibly interactive as possible in terms of going through several topics that are interesting to folks that are considering EB-5 or worried about their status right now and how EB-5 can be helpful. So without further ado, I'll let Jeff and Nima briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll jump on the topics that I find very interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. These are definitely interesting times in EB-5. So I've been in EB-5 for the better part of 9 years, and through that have seen a number of changes. The program was constantly up for renewal, et cetera. Now we have a 5-year program, which is exciting for everyone. Some of the new changes we'll focus on today. So I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
And Nima.
So, yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, especially those of you on the West Coast that woke up this morning and said 9 a.m. is a great time to listen to an attorney on a Sunday. So thank you for that. Thank you to 3G. So I'm Nima Korpivara. I'm a partner at KLD. We are a full-service immigration firm specializing in EB-5. Over about the last 10 years and over 2 firms, we filed 5,000 plus EB-5 petitions. Makes us either the largest or the second largest in the industry. Although we work a little bit different than other law firms, we won't accept working with just any regional center, any developer, or any investor. We really want to work with institutional level projects. We want to feel very confident that the project is going to move forward, create the jobs, and that the investors are going to get the green card. So we keep our circle pretty small. And in doing so, we can provide a better level of service for the investors and really try to relieve the anxiety over the immigration process. If we know your application is going to be approved, then we only need to manage your anxiety over processing times rather than fielding questions over, will the project move forward? And that's why, we're happy to be here with Golden Gate Global, because we think they fit all the parameters of what we look for in the space.
Fantastic, thank you. So with a couple of intros and logistics that I'd like to make. So one is that we are recording the session. So this recording will be available for attendees and anyone who's interested in re-listening this wonderful Sunday morning event. And then the second thing is that I just copy and pasted a chat box message on here Zoom, so you can look into more information. You can directly make an appointment with us to ask your questions as well through the link over there. And if you have any specific questions, you're more than welcome to put it into the Q&A box, although we would like to keep this as short as possible, and we will definitely respond to your questions, if not on the live session, definitely afterwards on an offline communication. So without further ado, I just wanted to start with Nima and the basics of EB-5 for the audience here. So without getting too much detail, could you just describe EB-5 a little bit, what it is in a couple of sentences, and how does it differ from other immigration options for this audience? I mean, we kind of started talking about this concept of taking your freedom back from employer for a lot of people who are living in the U.S. right now with an employment-based visa. So maybe you can touch on that a little bit for this audience. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. For all the news that U.S. immigration gets in the spotlight in the world, U.S. immigration is actually not very robust. If your interest is coming to the United States and becoming a permanent resident through a green card and then later citizenship, you have 3 paths. So that is employer-based. Someone is willing to hire you and usher you through the process. That is investment-based, whether it be through a corporate investment like an L1 or an EB-5 that obviously we're talking about here today. And the last is marriage-based. And, for those of you that are already married, marrying an additional U.S. citizen probably won't score you very, very many points at home. What is different about EB-5 compared to the other programs in the world is, the other programs in the world are investment, either through donation or through a treasury bill or through the stock market, relatively safe, low risk. The difference with EB-5 is two components. One, your investment must be at risk. And at risk means what you are investing in is actively using your dollars for what is the second part, job creation. So the EB-5 program is actually a jobs program that was started into the 1990s, and then it's gone through all sorts of different iterations over the years. But essentially the idea is you are putting money into the stream of commerce in the United States to either create direct W-2 employment or what was called indirect and induced, which would be, the fruits of your money, the fruits of your labor producing, the construction of a building, retail stores around it, restaurants around it, and so forth.
Thank you. And now knowing about just what EB-5 is, Jeff, could you explain one, who's who in this kind of environment and who we are as well as Golden Gate Global, what's our role and how we facilitate this, so we can get the audience a little bit lay off the land in terms of who's who.
Yeah, in EB-5, there's two different paths. There's the direct EB-5, where an investor would come over to the US, open his own business, hire 10 people, track those jobs, do reporting on it, et cetera. It's maybe 1 to 5% of all applicants go that route. Most of the applicants and the most successful path for applicants in EB-5 is to go through a regional center, EB-5 regional center. And so Golden Gate Global, our firm, controls several different regions. Those are geographic designations where we are allowed by the US government to raise money for EB-5. And investing with a regional center, what that allows the investor to do and allows us to do as the regional center is to pool investments. So the regional center, Golden Gate Global, we go out there and we look for really high quality construction-based projects that have a ton of job creation. And we look for borrowers who would like money for their project. What we do is we go out, we find investors who are interested in the project, we do all the due diligence on the project, vet it, et cetera, make sure it qualifies for immigration, and also make sure it's a safe investment financially. We go out, find the investors, pull the money together, and then we make a loan to a borrower, to a developer. Once we make that loan to the developer, we have access to all the jobs. So what that allows you to do, it allows us to document. You have an attorney like Nemo who will receive these jobs and prove to USCIS these jobs have been created, which allows you to qualify for EB-5. Nima mentioned, that the money must be at risk, and I think it's important to say that absolutely it must be at risk. Our job is to make sure that the risk is as small as possible. And to that end, Golden Gate Global, we've raised about $700 million so far. We've repaid about $175 million to investors so far. We've never had a default at any stage of the process, EB-5 process. It doesn't mean that there's no risk, but it doesn't have to be risky.
Thank you. So basically, one of the things that I'd like to add to Jeff's points are that these are also what we do is SEC compliant offerings that we put out in the market. So when we do this, as Jeff mentioned, when we pool these funds, these are put into really a thick kind of prospectus, like you would be investing in any private offering or even public offerings where you see a lot of descriptions, risk disclosures, etc. So a lot of legal folks are involved in this process to be able to take these out and make it available for you to read. So all the disclosures regarding whatever you're investing in are very, very clear. And also, like Jeff mentioned, one of the questions that we've been receiving from individuals who are interested in EB-5, okay, you're talking about a fund, but is it like a fund of funds or like a blind fund? in EB-5, typically these are one project funds. As Jeff mentioned, these are going into one project as a construction loan or preferred equity typically are how these are structured. So you know about that single specific project rather than kind of trusting Golden Gate Global with, or any company with like, okay, just take my money and invest wherever you would like to. So I think these are important, especially given we have now our own broker dealer as well that Jeff is leading, which also makes an additional, gives another layer of compliance in terms of security. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But Nima, can you explain what your role is as a lawyer? Because we alluded to that you work with the investors, but what are the most important things? There are these concepts or source of funds, path of funds, etc. And how does that work is one question. And two, we've been obviously hearing a lot about with this new 2022 adjustments to this program, a concept called concurrent filing, which is very significant for the individuals who happen to be in the US today. So maybe you can also segue into that conversation a little bit as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, as a lawyer, I do mostly investor representation. So, any investor, any individual situated in the US or anywhere internationally that's interested in moving forward with EB-5 engages a law firm like mine, and we go through two parallel paths. The first is we have a discussion about the project that you're interested in investing in. We do our review of the documentation to make sure it's EB-5 compliant and that the project is approvable. The second is we have to work with you on what's the source of funds. Essentially, your 526 application, which is the EB-5 application, one, shows all the project documents and how they're going to spend your money and create jobs. And the second, how are you able to earn and accumulate the 800,000 if you're investing in a TEA or the 1,050,000 in a non-TEA. And USCIS doesn't necessarily think of time when it's looking at your source of funds documents. They kind of look at the seed to the tree. So, an example would be if you are doing a refinancing or selling of a home, and that is going to net you the 800,000+, then USCIS is going to say, well, how are you able to purchase that home? And then if the answer to that question is income, that's when we'll ask you for tax returns or bank statements, and you start preparing these documents that would look very similar to, loan closing documents with a bank, or some sort of audited financials that you would prepare. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we have those documents and they're prepared correctly and we can submit them to USCIS, ideally without question, right? Because if we get no questions in response, that means your processing time from USCIS is faster. You feel very comfortable in the project. Maybe you tell your friends how great I am as an attorney, and then we're all happy and we generate more business. This idea of the 800,000 that you need to put into the project, it's changed over the years. So when we say the new regulations, we're talking about everything that took an effect of May of 2022. The old regulations would be anything prior. So in the beginning of EB-5, you actually were not required to make a full investment until we got to the 829, which is the last stage of the process. Now in 2022, you need to have the full investment in prior to your application being approved. So you have a much shorter window to do that. And this is really important when we come to the idea of this concurrent filing. Historically, in the other EB applications, EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, you go through this process of the perm, then you file the I-140. And if your priority date is current, you're able to file for the 485 green card along with your I-140, and you get the near immediate benefit of work authorization and a travel document. Those documents allow you to live, work, and travel within and outside of the United States while you are pending for the green card. I like to think that option exists because USCIS knows that sometimes they're very slow with application processing. They don't want to hinder your ability to work, especially when you have the EAD. You are no longer tied to your employer. If you have an EB-5 based EAD, you have the freedom to work for anyone. You have the freedom to start your own business. So getting that in your hands is of the utmost importance. So historically in EB-5, you would file this application, and irrespective of your priority date being current, you would not be able to move forward until the application was approved. So 18-month processing time, maybe 2-year processing time. You would be approved. If you're in the US, you could file the AOS. If you're outside of the United States, you would go through consular processing. Consular processing could add another 4 to 6 months timeline. And now we get to a point where you're looking at 2.5 years. It's very difficult for normal human beings to project out their life schedules, their children's schedules, where they're going to be across 2.5 years. What we can do now is what every other EB category could always do. We can file your EB-5 application and your 485 EAD advanced parole travel document all at the same time. So for anyone in the United States in an H1 and maybe badly retrogressed in an EB2 or EB3 category, this is significantly huge, right? You can have an EAD in your hand 3 to 4 months from filing the application. You have the freedom to move forward, start a new employer. And this option would be available to some other non-immigrant visas as well. The only thing we want to make sure is between these partial fundings and source of funds, we want to feel really confident that your application is going to be approved. Because if you're going to file the 485 and abandon what your previous status is, we have to make sure all the applications are going to be approved and you're not in any jeopardy of falling out of status. So that's what myself and my team do. We make sure the application is bulletproof, for lack of a better word.
So I'm gonna just basically make it a little bit even specific for everyone to understand. So both Jeff and Nima. So imagine I am a person that is working at a large technology company here in California, that I either am worried about the layoffs that are happening recently, or I already got laid off. Or I'm a student that is looking to graduate by the end of this year as a foreign student, and am interested in finding a job soon after my F1 OPT whatever expires. Could you, Nima, just talk a little bit about the timelines, because there's this perception and questions that I received before this webinar that, oh, EB-5 takes forever. We will never get our green cards on time, etc. That's the immigration part. And to Jeff, to you after Nima, if you can address the investment piece of it, right? The timeline. Once these individuals decide to invest, what are they looking for in terms of getting their funds back, returns, things like that? So that would be helpful. And what happens if they get denied? So those are all specific questions to the investment. Nima.
Yeah, definitely. I think, this perception that EB-5 takes forever is it's incorrect. EB-5 is actually the second fastest pathway to a green card. If you were to do a marriage-based petition to a US citizen right now, you would still be looking at maybe 12 to 18 months for approval. Our expectation on approval of the EB-5 and approval of the green card right now would be maybe 2 years. But when you account for that 2 years, you have to think of the concurrent filing. Right. So if you were deciding, hey, I want to file my EB-5, I'm ready, I have all the documents, I'm in the United States, we could file the EB-5 and the 485 tomorrow. The idea would be within 3 months, you have your employment authorization and you have your advanced parole, which is your travel visa. And then, the EB-5 and the green card come when they come, right? You have all the rights of a green card holder. You can work, you can travel, you can start your own business. Your spouses and your dependents would receive the same documents as well. So you have absolute freedom to move forward. And then, if the green card takes a little bit of time in processing, it doesn't really affect you. People that commonly say EB-5 take forever, those are people that are outside the United States. They have no intention of coming to the United States immediately. And then they may get stuck in a little bit longer processing. They have to go through the consular process. Maybe the consular asks for additional documents. And now the processing times have ballooned on them and they become frustrated. For this idea of concurrent filing, especially for anyone in the US on the H1, if you're an Indian national in EB2 or EB3, that is genuinely the never-ending process, right? I know that if we file your EB-5, we have your EAD in your hand in 3 to 4 months. If you're unfortunately a 2019 priority date EB2 Indian national, who knows, 20 years, 30 years? And so the ability to concurrently file for someone in the US on a dual intent visa, incredible, right? You may have your track, you have your priority date you keep it going. And then you file your EB-5 and you just race it essentially, right? But certainly if your priority date is, as I said, 2018, 2019, the EB-5 is faster. For anybody that may be affected by these recent bout of layoffs in tech companies, there's something that's called Code Section 245K. It says that as long as you were in a legal status when you entered the United States, tourist visa, F1, B1, any status that you were admitted in, if that status terminates, you have up to 6 months to find a new status by filing this EB-5 petition, and you will not be penalized for unlawful stay. So if you just unfortunately hear from your manager that your employment is being terminated at the end of the month, you would have until July of this year to file an EB-5 and a concurrent filing without being out of status, right? So you now have a little bit of freedom, and rather than finding another H1 employer, another L1, well, there's the sea of layoffs, you have the freedom of the EAD. For anyone that's entering the United States in a tourist visa or an F1, the rules are slightly different. When you enter as a non-immigrant, you have to have non-immigrant intent. So that means maybe you're here for vacation, maybe you're here to look at an investment opportunity, maybe you're just here to complete 1 semester of school or the full year of education. So you wouldn't be able to file on day one for the 485 green card on the EB-5. But the rules do say after 90 days, enough time has passed that you can change the reason you entered the United States. So for example, I entered on the F1 to complete this semester of studies, but around the 100-day mark, I met Aaron and Jeff from Golden Gate Global. I had the opportunity to tour their project, and I think this EB-5 is for me. And it's as long as it's after that 90-day mark, you can move forward with the EB-5 application, and you can file a change of status from your F1 to your adjustment of status. You now have protected status in the United States. You can stay in the United States. There's no effect to your immigration process, even if the F1 or the tourist visa expire. And then as soon as you have that employment authorization in your hand, you can work. And as soon as you have that advanced parole document in your hand, you can travel. And then again, you just have to sit there waiting patiently on the processing times for the application to be approved. But what does it matter if you're living, you're working, you're traveling? These are a little bit long-winded answers for our audience. So I appreciate, we're not charging by the word today. So
thanks. And Jeff, maybe you can just walk them through in terms of, okay, they invested $800,000 plus any kind of expenses. So fantastic. And they're maybe eligible to be able to stay. That's out of their mind now. So they can passively wait for their process to move on. But what about the investment? Where's their money? How is that monitored?
Okay, I'm being told that I'm difficult to hear. Is this better? I've moved closer to my camera.
It's a little better, but you're still kind of breaking off at the end of sentences. But yeah, if you can keep it loud, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll do my best. So I think it's good to take a step back here and talk about, Nibid mentioned your money must be at risk. So the way EB-5 works is the government considers your money at risk. It must be at risk up until you finish the conditional period on your conditional green card. So if we take a step back and we look at the timelines, you apply your I-526 for EB-5. Roughly, we have no idea exactly what the answer is because it's at the whim of the U.S. government, but we're going to say it's about 2 years to get approval for your I-526. At that point, you would either adjust status or you may have adjusted status earlier. You're already in the U.S., like Nima was saying, or you'll have to do a consulate interview in your home country. Let's say that takes another 6 months. So you're at about 2.5 years until you step foot in the United States. Now, when you step foot in the United States, you have your conditional green card. That conditional period is 2 years. So USCIS dictates that your money must be at risk through that 2-year period, at the least. So if your money must stay at risk at that point for another 2 years, that's 4.5 years. The way we've structured EB-5 loans is to roughly coincide with this time, okay? They are 5-year loans. So you invest your money with Golden Gate. We send the money to the developer who then uses those funds. From that point where the money is sent to the developer, it's a 5-year maturity on the loan. Now, your return mostly is immigration. You also get a small rate of return. For our projects, it's 1%. 1% return to the investor. But your money stays with that developer there's two different things that you need to have, two different points you need to reach before you can get the money back. First is you must complete that conditional period, meaning that you must have been in the U.S. for 2 years on the conditional green card. Once you have that checked off from the immigration side, you are technically eligible to get your money back. Now, the second piece that has to happen is maturity of the loan. So that loan is 5 years from the date your money begins to be used by the developer. So if those two things have happened, if we are 5 years into the project, into your loan, and you've stayed your 2 years on your conditional green card, at that point, you're eligible to receive your funds back. Now, most EB-5 projects are structured with also extensions. In our case, and most projects out there, there's 2 one-year extensions on the loan. That extension is at the developer's, at his request. So if the developer chooses, they can keep your money invested for 6 or 7 years. Sometimes this is a benefit for the investor because you wouldn't have completed your conditional time period and you need to stay invested. I would say in the past, almost every repayment I've been a part of, and I've been a part of probably 15 or 20, no developer has used the extension, but we were always in an environment where interest rates were falling. So it's possible that these loans might go up to 7 years. And I think you as an investor should get comfortable with the fact that your money will be invested in the project for 7 years. So those are the two pieces that have to happen for you to get your funds back.
Thank you. And so basically that timeline explains that they kind of almost park their funds in the project and their wait. So it's just like a passive investment opportunity for them while they accumulate their annual return, as you mentioned, and they're looking to 5 to 7 year of return, and depending upon both their immigration milestones as well as the project repayment. So during that process, Jeff, what makes them feel safe or confident about the return of their funds? So basically, we talked about two aspects, right? For their immigration, it's the job creation, which in a lot of our projects, including this one, it's already created. So when they invest in, the jobs are created. So that actually takes that unknown out of the equation. So they will know that there are going to be no issues on the immigration side. But on the investment side, obviously, this has to be at risk, as you mentioned. So what are some of the checks and balances that are out there, both industry-wide as well as a company level, that protects their funds, and how do they know where their money is at a given time?
Yeah, I mean, very important point to think about. There's a few things, there are a few levels of due diligence that I would expect the investor to do. One is the actual regional center. Again, if you invest with Golden Gate Global, your money is coming to Golden Gate Global, but we're not using it. We are not the developer. So there's a third-party developer. So first thing is you want to check on the reputation and the track record of the regional center, right? The next thing is when you are doing your due diligence, you're not just going to blindly, and you mentioned this, Aaron, you're not just going to blindly give your money to Golden Gate Global and I get to put it wherever I want. You invest into one specific project. So you can do exhaustive due diligence on the structure of that project. You know what you're investing in, capital structure of that, the developer's track record, all those things. And then from an immigration perspective, you have an expert like Nima who is going to make sure that the project and the regional center qualify for EB-5. And I will tell you, someone like Nima has never had a denial based on any of the work he's done. I can never guarantee and say it's perfect, but essentially it is. Okay. So those aspects, you're looking at due diligence on the regional center and due diligence then on the individual project. Once you've made the investment, there'll be quarterly updates on the project. You can always speak to the regional center. You get updates. We have a third-party administrator. So Aaron mentioned that all of the jobs have been created in our current project. So if you invest in the project we have now, from an immigration perspective, the jobs have been created. And it's not just me telling you. We have a third party called Baker Tilly, which actually does the diligence on, they check where the flows go, money goes into the project, that the jobs have been created, the money's been spent properly. So you have a third party that is verifying this information as well. I think that's very important. And the final piece is, so we're governed by USCIS, the government, on the immigration side, but all investments fall under purview of SEC. But we've taken an extra step. So we are registered with a broker dealer. We'll have our own broker dealer soon. So I've been registered for 20 plus years as a broker. So no different than being registered at Goldman Sachs, et cetera. And we come under regulation of FINRA, which is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and the SEC. So you can go pull up on the site called Broker Check run by FINRA, and you can look at my entire career. You can see if there's been any complaints, any misdeeds, et cetera, any violations, fines. And the same goes for the broker dealer that we're registered with. So it's an extra level of due diligence that the investor can do and perform on this.
Thank you. So before I go back to Nima, I just wanted to mention one more thing. So for those who don't know about the industry itself, in 2022, in March, there was this new EB-5 Integrity and Reform Act enacted. What it does is, one, making the program as a kind of a more long-standing program for the regional centers, like the firms like us. And also it added certain levels of protection for the investors. So that those adjustments are to the benefit of the investor. They also made some requirements about third-party fund administration and in additional accountability and integrity measures for regional centers, fund managers, etc. The good thing is that we didn't have to do anything above and beyond with this new introduction, because from inception on, we already had these third-party fund administration on our funds. So from the moment that your funds are in, on the job creation side, as Jeff mentioned, that's monitored not only by the developer itself for the construction spending, but the Baker Tilly reports kind of review that. Two, there's a separate fund administrator that monitors all the fund movement. So in addition to us, the fund manager, they also, by their license, governed by their license, have to take care of that. And once the funds are in the project, there's a third-party construction consultant that looks into whatever they're building and checks that if that matches whatever the business plan or the documents that you're signing are saying. So at any given time, you can inquire or get those responses back from not only us, but these third parties to make sure that your funds are safe and your job creation is safe. So let's go back to the immigration aspect just for a second, because Nima, you said that the only time that these investors are really working are the time that they're preparing their source and path of funds with you, pretty much. And there is this concept of partial investment, right? So there's this, let's talk about $800,000. Do they have to invest all of it at once? Can they do it in in separate remittances? And does it impact anything on the proof of these funds when they invest in different chunks?
Certainly. So, the idea of partial investment is not new, right? So as I said earlier, the EB-5 regulations as originally written did not require the full investment amount until the A-29. So the A-29 is filed after you receive the green card, after the 2-year conditional period. Later, USCIS, through adjudicative policy, started saying, well, I'm not going to approve your I-526 until you're fully funded. Unless you can show me that all your money is in, we won't approve your case. So we would have investors say, at that time, the investment was $500,000. They would put $100,000 in. 2 years would go by, and then USCIS would come by and say, hey, you have 30 days to show us you put another $400,000 in, your application is going to be denied. What happened as a result of these new rules that passed is USCIS made that practice, or Congress on behalf of USCIS made that practice law. So the law now says you need to show that you are fully invested by the time your application is going to be approved. So as of today, you may have 18 months to 2 years. Hopefully a year from now, you'll have 8 months or less to come up with that. And of course, that timeline for funding is a discussion between you and the regional center and the project, right? Some regional centers may say, we'll accept project partial funding because the developer doesn't need the money for another year, maybe another 2 years, right? Another regional center may say, no, the developer needs the money right now. They need the money in order to get a senior loan, no partial. So, this is a form of negotiation, and that's how you end up choosing your regional center sometimes. But what the rules do say, though, is in order to file a partial funding application, you need to show intent to fund and ability to fund. So intent, of course, is not defined by the U.S. government, right? So we as attorneys and in partnership with the developers and the regional centers, we've come up with the idea of what intent is. So intent means you are signing all project-related documents. So the subscription agreement, the operating agreement. In addition to that, we would call it a side letter, which is an intent to fund letter that lays out a timeline that you have agreed to fund, an initial amount that you are willing to fund, a potential penalty if you don't meet that timeline, and then a description of the ability to fund. So the ability to fund would be, say, hey, I have a house, it's worth $2 million. I just put it on the market. Here is the listing. I expect it to close within the next 3 to 6 months. And as soon as it does, the proceeds would go in. So that would be the narrative included in that letter. And then our source of funds would show, the deed, the sales listing, the contract with the agent. And then that gives USCIS an idea of what we're going to do. The interesting thing is there's this thing in EB-5 called material change. When you submit an application, both on the project side as an investor, you are taking a snapshot of where everything is that day and time. And while your application is processing, you are not allowed to have a material change. So if you tell USCIS, hey, I'm investing in this apartment building, and then the developer says, well, apartment actually wasn't a good idea. We're going to turn this into a hotel and a nightclub. That's a material change. USCIS will say you need to withdraw your application and you need to refile it. Material change, however, does not extend to source of funds. You do have the ability to change your source of funds. So while you were waiting for this home to close in 3 to 6 months, maybe you won the lottery. Maybe you received an inheritance. Maybe you got a large gift. Maybe you sold something else. So you were actually able to change the strategy that we put in the initial documentation with whatever this updated source of fund strategy is. So there is freedom there. But with that freedom, we still need to show that you have some sort of ability to fund at the time of the application. So if it's RSUs, if it's your stocks that, you want to wait for the stock market to rally a little bit, we'd want a brokerage statement. We do need to show that you have assets. But as long as we submit all that application within your application to USCIS, there's no fear of moving forward with a partial funding.
And Nima, one more quick question really on that specific item before I go back to Jeff. So you said that like a gift, etc. So imagine I work here. I'm a technology worker. I have some RSUs, maybe some of it liquid, some of it not. And how can I source this? Can I get some of the money from my parents, from Vietnam, India, etc., and merge the funds with whatever I have? Can I sell a home? Like really shortly, can you just describe where these funds need to come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So any legal source of income can be used as the basis of your source of funds. So that can be a gift from a friend or a family member. It could be a gift from a distant relative. It could be the selling of art, watches. It could be inheritance. It could be gold you received at your wedding in India. It could be rental property. There's actually no limit here other than human imagination and how the income was earned. What we have to do, though, is we need to be able to document it. So what you often happen is you'll have a wealthy friend or family member that they're happy to give you an $800,000 or $1 million gift, but they're not so happy to show you how they earned the money. So that would be the stumbling block. We need to be able to evidence all the income that was earned. So if you're receiving a gift from a friend or a family member for the full 800,000, the source of funds burden is no longer on you. You don't need to show any documentation of how you earned money. It would be completely on that individual to provide documentation. So whether it be W-2s or bank statements, maybe they have rental contracts for properties that earn in them income. It would be all that would be required. The only time source of funds is not required is when the individual or company that is giving you the money has a lending license. So the US government says if you have a lending license, whether in the US or any other country, you have KYC standards, You have already gone through an internal process to make sure that that money is lawful and clean. And so a bank is not required to provide source of funds. They can just give you money.
Yeah. And just
so,
to
and
touch
then
on,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to touch on what you were saying about partial funding from the regional center side, for us, it really depends on the developer's needs. So in the project that we have right now, for instance, there's a 3 or 4 year construction timeline. So we would accept partial funding because the developer is well capitalized. The project's underway and they have a need for capital over the next 3 to 4 years. So if there's a 6 months, 8 month delay in getting the total money in, we would be comfortable with it as long as Nima, as the filing attorney, was comfortable with the structure the investor has. That's not always the case.
Yeah, and
some projects are already done and they need the capital yesterday. They won't wait.
And if I can add one thing, it kind of goes back to the last question you had, Aaron, that Jeff answered. A lot of the times when we speak to investors, they say, well, this 1% return, it doesn't work for me because this is hard-earned money. And the one thing that I want to note for everyone is you have to remember when we do EB-5, right, we have to go to these institutional level developers that can get money from REITs, from funds at say 5%. We have to go to them, or Jeff and the 3G team have to go to them and say, well, please accept EB-5. And the developer is going to say, why? Right? So you have to be able to beat the rate that they are getting, and you have to beat the rate so deeply because EB-5, you can't raise it overnight, right? It may take you a year, it may take you a year and a half, it may take you 2 years. So, if you're issuing a loan at 4% and then you're waiting for investors and you're allowing partial payment options that last, into a 2-year ability to fund this loan, you have costs. There really isn't much left over to pay. So, and then the response we often get is the investor will say, okay, well, my friend is offering me 12%. And the question is why? Why are they offering you 12%? Why would they be willing to pay that much, right? What's missing in that project or what's going on in that project that can pay? And it seems to be when they're reviewing the third-party project, it's all due diligence. Who are the other equity partners? Who's the bank? Who's the lender? And then when it's a friend or a family member offering a higher amount, that due diligence flies out the window.
Yeah. And I Nima, you and I have probably seen a couple $1 billion of repayments in EB-5 and can tell you that none of them offered more than 1% return, right? If you're going to get 4 or 5% return, you're not getting your money back, and you may or may not get immigration. I've never seen a project that was able to give those types of returns. I mean, and again, Neiman said it already. Our developer can borrow money from any bank in the world. So we have to make it cheap, 2, 3, 4% discounted to the market rate in order to get them to take our money. If that's the case, there's no money left to pay the investor. Otherwise, it's, there's no money for us to be involved in the business. There's not enough to go around.
I think that's also a good segue to very briefly on the project selection and what we do, why we do what we do. So basically, as you mentioned, Jeff, we like to finance projects that technically don't need us and don't need the money. That gives investors a little bit of kind of security because there's less dependency on EB-5. But let's talk about 2 scenarios where one, what if the investor gets denied? What happens from an immigration standpoint in our projects? And 2, what happens if this kind of recession comes, or any kind of, because real estate is cyclical, and maybe you can touch on why we invest in real estate and why EB-5 and real estate are so overlapping for the edification of the crowd here. But I think these are important considerations for investors when they're investing. What happens and why that happens.
Yeah, the first point about denial. So we had extreme confidence that our project is not going to get a denial from the way it's structured. We've done this. It's a boilerplate in terms of the structure. All successful EB-5 projects have a similar structure to this. We know we're not going to get a denial of the project side. We also know that if we work with Nima or an attorney of his ilk, he's not going to get a denial. So we're not scared of that at all. That's why we have denial guarantees on our fund. So if the investor gets a denial, they'll get refunded their funds. The developer has to keep a certain amount of money aside for denials. Further, we guarantee it beyond that because it's not going to happen. The only case I can think of for a denial is the investor lies about a source of funds or something like that. Okay, so nothing from the project side. Certainly not if NEMA's given the green light. In terms of recession, yeah, I mean the real estate markets, all markets in the U.S. have been extremely volatile over the last 15, 20 years. Right, just in 2008 we had massive recession. We may or may not be headed there now, but I've been a part of repayments in EB-5, and Golden Gate's been a part of repayments in EB-5 during that entire stretch. And the reason for that is the structure of the investments. Right, you're a lender to this project. So while you hope a project is wildly successful and everybody gets rich off of it, that doesn't matter to you. Your result is binary. You want the project to stay afloat and to be a viable project at the end of the 5 years. Okay. How we achieve that, and almost every repayment I've seen in EB-5 has had a similar structure. What that is significant developer equity. You want the developer who's creating the project to have a large amount of money. And in general, we look for 25 to 40% equity from the developer. Our developer has 30% equity in this project. The other thing we look for is another large bank to be a lender, right? We think we do amazing due diligence, but we also like the idea that there's a large bank that's been involved in this and thoroughly vetted this project. So usually these projects have a senior bank, a senior lender that has gone through and decided to make a loan to this project. The final thing is we want EB-5 to be a small percentage, right? We don't want this project to be waiting for us to raise money to be able to get started and get completed. So for us, this project we have right now, we're only 18% of the capital stack. So we know if I'm really bad at my job or EB-5, people aren't interested in EB-5 anymore, this project's going to go ahead with or without us. If you have that structure, right, that gives you a lot of security that regardless of fluctuations in the market, you're pretty secure. And the final piece is, has construction started, right? If construction is started and is pretty far along the way, far along, you can feel pretty secure if the funding's in place and construction is started that this thing is going to get built. So we're doing a rental apartment building where on the first building, 3/4 of the construction is already done. All the jobs are already created. So we know, and the capital's in place. We know this building is going to get completed. Now, as a rental building, what we have to hope for is that this building is significantly occupied in the next 5 years. It becomes a viable project that this developer can get new financing to repay our investors, right? So while we hope it's wildly successful, again, we just need to make sure it's viable. And that's why this lending side of EB-5, where you're a mezzanine loan or a second lien loan, has been the most successful vehicle for EB-5 investors.
Thank you. So as we reach towards the end of our time here, I just wanted to mention a couple of the questions that we have also received here during the live conversation. One is, Nima, you mentioned a little bit about the source of funds and where you're getting the money. One of the questions is about the financing. So can an investor take a loan to be able to put it into EB-5? And what do they need to show? Like, can it be a loan that is against their property, or can it be a loan that is just like a line of credit? Could you just address that really quickly? I know it can get very technical when it comes down to source of funds.
So yeah, the short answer is absolutely. I would say a loan against a home is 9 out of 10 applications. That's the most common source of investment. The loan can be secured or unsecured. There's a famous ruling against USCIS versus USCIS, where essentially they held that USCIS is not a lender. They're not in a position to question why a lender would issue a loan. So what we come back to is, who is the lender? Do they have a lending license? And if the answer is yes, then whatever decision they made in underwriting to give you a secured or undersecured or an unsecured loan is completely acceptable. We would show the loan documents, we would show the bank statement that shows that you received the money, and then the wire transfer to the project. If you're getting a loan, secured or unsecured, from an individual or a company, then we do need to show those source of funds documents. For the individual, be employment letters, W-2s, bank statements. For a company, it would be tax returns, bank statements. loan agreement. So it's a little bit fact specific, but the answer is yes, absolutely.
Thank you. One more question, this one for you, Jeff. Let's say I have invested with Golden Gate Global's current project. The project is doing really well, and the borrower doesn't want to keep the loan in its books anymore, wants to pay off after 5 years, but my immigration is not ready yet. So it's just still kind of, I need to keep the funds at risk, maybe 1 or 2 more years. What can we do? So if you pay me, then my immigration is gone. How can we, and what do we do in that case?
Yeah, I mean, this has become an issue in the past. It's called redeployment. So you'd be in a situation where the loan is matured, the project's successful. Congratulations, that's great. But we can't give you your money back because it needs to stay at risk. It's unfair, but we can talk about the merits of whether or not this is a good policy or not another day. It's just the fact of the matter. So we would have to come up with a redeployment strategy. In our case, we'd show the investors a few options, perhaps 1, 2, 3 options, or we will have come up with an option for them to reinvest. And now this option, they would have to approve on. So we're not going to take their money. And I think this is an important point. I mean, I'll go off a little bit. There are projects out there from developers themselves, not third-party regional centers. And those projects will say, oh, it's completely done already. You invest your money and the project's complete and up and running. The problem is that the developer can then take your money 2 years in and then redeploy it into any project they want, whether it's ground up or not, without your approval. It's not the case with us. We have no incentive to do that, right? We want to put your money in the safest possible place because we earn money as you earn. So for us, we will find an alternative project that you will agree to invest in. In the case of our current project called Brooklyn Basin, we're in phase 2 of 4 phases. So most likely, if we reached a redeployment area, the investor has an ongoing project that will need capital as well. And you as an investor, I would imagine, if you've been successful with this developer, you'd probably be comfortable extending that loan another year or 2. So for our project, that's most likely our redeployment strategy.
Thank you. So as we reach, like we have maybe 3 more minutes, I just want to end with one note. So Jeff, Nima, let's say folks looked into this project. They look into our track record. Great. We have financed like one of the largest home builders in the world, Lennar. We work with Sacramento Kings for their stadium, etc. We have a good track record of repayment and investment. They look into Nima. He is very well known in the industry, etc. So they feel comfortable. They look into the project documents. Okay, so what are the next steps? How do I initiate? Maybe a couple of sentences to kick this off. What is my first action to take if I'm interested in going to EB-5 route today?
Yeah, I'll answer. I think, two parallel tracks that happen at the same time. The first is we have a high-level discussion of the source of funds. We make you familiar with the documents that you need to provide. Nothing is required original documentation. It's all digital. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable that you're able to get the documents. You have a firm understanding of the source of funds. At the same time, you would start your discussion with Golden Gate Global, and you would begin discussing with them the terms of the investment, going through the process of signing all the documentation. And once you've done that, we'll dig deeper into the source of funds. You'll start providing the documentation to us. Our firm generally turns cases around within 2 to 3 weeks. So I think for a motivated investor that says, I'm ready to go, you should really be targeting, the 3-week mark to be able to file your petition. So it's pretty quick.
Yeah, and from our side, like Nima said, it's as long as it takes. We can turn around all the documentation in a day, but that's not a problem. The question is, when do you get comfortable enough as an investor to put the money into the project? So that takes as long as it takes. I've had investors that looked at a project for 6 months to a year. I've had people that, looked at it for a couple of days and said, hey, I'm ready to go. And, we encourage things like coming to the site to see it, come see our office. We want to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, I would emphasize that. Please, one, if you're interested, if you're in the area or willing to travel to California, we would be happy to show you the project. As Jeff mentioned, this is an ongoing construction, so you can see, visit existing projects and the existing construction. Two, I would say if you have any questions, I've been posting here as well our contact information as well as a link to Calendly, so you can make an appointment immediately. If you click on that link, please feel free to do so. If you have further questions, we would be happy to continue the conversation on the project side, Jeff and I, and obviously on the immigration side with Nima. So please, if you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, I would just like to thank both Nima and Jeff for taking the time, and all of you as well for getting on the Sunday. I hope the rest of your day goes really well. And that's it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Thank you, everyone.
Good to see you guys. Thanks, everyone.